Good afternoon, students. Today we are going to have a look at directed writing, O-level writing paper 12, part A. We're going to look into how students should attempt directed writing. Now we're not going to complete the entire syllabus of the directed writing, but we're just going to look into one area, which is informal writing, and I'll tell you all the details which are relevant to directed writing in formal letters. So now let's have a look at the presentation that I have for you. Hopefully it is going to be very helpful. As said earlier, directed writing is writing paper 12. We are going to look into part A. Directed writing, as the word suggests, is a task which is prescribed or prescribed in some way. It is very important that we read the task carefully before attempting to write. Directed writing carries 30 marks. You will write a non-fiction task of about 200 to 300 words. When we say 200 to 300 words, that means the minimum word limit is 200, not less than 200, and the maximum is 300, not more than 300. Now, counting of the words is very important. Every single word is counted as well. You have to write whatever task is provided to you. You have to follow the directions and accomplish the task. Now, if we look at the marks allocation, we will see that 15 marks are allocated for task fulfillment and 15 marks are for language. Now, what do we exactly mean by this? Let's have a look. But before I move any further, let me tell you, in the directed writing section, you may be asked to write letter, reports, informative articles, news reports, or speeches, etc. As we talk about the task fulfillment, let's have a look at what things are required to fulfill the tasks. You need to look into the purpose of the task given, audience, whoever is being addressed, tone of the letter, is it formal, is it informal, rubrics, instructions that are given to you by the examiner, format, what format do you have to follow. If it's an informal letter, naturally the format is different. For a formal letter, format would be different. Simultaneously, it is going to vary for speech, news report, etc. Situation, as to what situation is given and what information is relevant that you have to use. Required content is what you have to use and write, whatever is being asked by the examiner. The entire section, that essential components we have discussed earlier, contains about 15 marks for task fulfillment. If you miss out any of the following, or if you fail to accomplish any one, you may lose marks from task fulfillment. However, you will never get a 0 in task fulfillment if you have accomplished different tasks that were required by the examiner. Moving on further, let's have a look at the language for which you will be getting marks. Sentence structure, verb forms, vocabulary, punctuation, and spelling. In short, grammar is very, very important when we talk about the language, for which you will be marked and you will be given about 15 marks. Now, it is very important that we understand structures of compound, complex, simple sentences, very well punctuated, with a good usage of vocabulary and no repetition of similar words over and over again. So we need to understand that we should know more synonyms and we should be very thorough and fluent with our spellings. Right usage of tense is also very important. Now, let's have a look at the question that we have here. You need to write between 200 and 300 words. A question that as per the examiner comes in front of you might look as a question that I've given here. This is an example question, a sample that is for you to read. Your best friend who is in Singapore has written to you asking how you are getting on with your new friends in new city. Your reply telling him or her about a recent incident which scared you terribly. Your letter must include the following: what happened? Why were you scared? How the situation was resolved. You need to cover all the points above in detail. You should make sure your best friend will understand your feelings and sympathize with you. Start your letter with dear, name of your friend, and remember to provide a suitable ending. While looking at the letter carefully, I said that in task fulfillment you will be given rubrics, which are instructions that are given to you by the examiner. If you look clearly, we will find the limit of 200 and 300 words given to us, then the 3 bulleted points that states what happened, why were you scared, how the situation was resolved, and then the examiner wants you to cover all 3 points in detail, and you need to start your letter with "Dear," whatever the name of your friend, provide a suitable ending. We need to understand the tone of the letter. Assuming it is written to a friend, it is naturally informal. Moving on further, this is a format that typically would be used for an informal letter. You have to write your address over here. We need to write down the address. If you look clearly, this is your address. And then you have to write down the date, leaving 1 line here. Then you address your friend, name of your friend, dear Elisa. You start with, a regular letter normally starts with things like how are you, what have you been up to, what are you doing these days, etc. The most important thing is that we have a certain word limit and we need to wrap it up very quickly. So you need to understand that you have to accomplish the tasks that have been provided by the examiner as well. So which means that you have to wrap up your letter very quickly. You need to understand that you have to finish your letter very, very quickly. An appropriate ending to an informal letter can be yours sincerely and your name. Now, naturally, how would you start a letter? You can start with your friend that, let's suppose your friend had written a letter to you, and if it's a reply, you can always say, thank you for writing the letter, thank you for thinking about keeping in mind that I am here and, supporting me off, etc. This can be an appropriate start. Or again, as mentioned earlier, how are you, what have you been up to, or what are you doing these days? Now, as said earlier, you have to wrap it up very quickly. You have to finish off within the word limit of 300 words. So keeping that in mind, you have to think of an excuse to, say goodbye to your friend, see off your friend, say farewell. I must stop now because it's time for dinner and mom needs my help is something that you can use to excuse yourself from your friend or the letter that you're writing to your friend, or for example, sorry, I've got to go now and I have to look after my baby brother, etc. Now, there are some points that we must remember. And these points are very, very important. As said earlier, your rubrics are very important. And you need to understand that the bulleted points that have been given over there have to be used in the letter one by one. If you miss out on any of the points, you naturally miss out on your points in your task accomplishment, and simultaneously, if your content is not that, the entire content is not there, what from the language are also deducted. Now, as the examiner said, you need to begin your letter with "Dear." So that means you will not include any address, any date over there. You will simply start with "Dear" and the name of your friend. Let us suppose, assuming the name of my friend is Shasha, I say "Dear." Then I start with the letter. There's no need to write down address or date as per the format. You need to read the instructions in the slide. Let's move further. You have to be very, very certain about it. Any deviation and you will lose marks from task fulfillment. You are not allowed to use contractions at all. This is a must rule. You need to remember. It is a rule that every student appearing for directed writing paper must remember. You cannot use any contracted forms in the directed writing portion, which means that you will not use "don't." Instead of "don't," you will over there, you will use "do not." Indentation may vary. Helen Toner, the examiner, O-level examiner, head examiner in fact, says that indentation may vary in directed writing, which means you may write left-aligned letter. However, you may write with finger spaces in the letter as well. Do you have any questions? I am available for your questions. You may call if you have any questions now. Some time off to ask questions, right? We have a call here.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. And this is Sami. Okay, Sami, what are your questions?
Ma'am, my first question is, what is the word limit in directed writing?
Sami, we need to understand that this is directed writing, and as per the instructions, you have been given a word limit by the examiner, which is 200 to 300 words. However, the examiner gives a little leverage to an exceeding of about 5 to 10 words. So if let's say you have written about 310 to 315 words, the examiner may actually ignore. However, if it is instead of 300, you write 400, you write 500 words, then your marks will be deducted from task accomplishment. But not for 5 to 3 words, 3 to 5 words or 10 words can be excused.
Ma'am, my second question is, what was meant by the audience in the component section?
Sami, when I said audience, I meant the person to whom the letter is being addressed. Let us suppose the letter is being addressed to your grandfather or father. Naturally, your tone is going to be different than what if you're addressing it to a friend. So we have to see the audience, the person to whom the letter is addressed to, or directed writing, the task that has been addressed to. We have to see the audience and then decide on the tone.
Ma'am, my last question is, how many paragraphs in letter writing?
In this letter, the one that we have discussed, keeping in mind the 3 bulleted points for which you have to write 1 paragraph each, which means introduction, then first bullet, second bullet, third bullet, and the conclusion altogether would be 5 paragraphs. However, in an informal and a formal letter, a typical structure of the formal would say introductory paragraph, a middle portion, and the conclusion. Right? So 3 paragraphs, but we have to include the 3 bullets, and each bullet means 1 paragraph. So in this one, we'll have 5 paragraphs, but let's keep in our mind the word limit, which is 300 words max.
Thank you, ma'am. That was all.
Thank you. Thank you. So that is all for today. If there are any further questions that you have, you can ask me now. And with this, you can attempt the final question that we have here and test yourself.